The envelope had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I finally opened it. I kept walking past it, making coffee, grabbing my keys, unloading groceries, and every time I'd glance at it and then look away. I knew what was inside. I'd been the one to request it. Before I get into this, I want to ask you something. Leave it in the comments. What's the hardest thing about being the child who actually shows up? Because that's what this story is really about. My name is Naomi. I'm 31 years old, and until 14 months ago, I shared a house with my father and my younger brother. Not because I couldn't afford my own place. I could. I stayed because my father asked me to. Because after my mother passed, he said he didn't want to be alone in that house. And because I loved him, and because grief does something to you that makes you say yes to things you might not otherwise agree to, I said okay. I said okay, and I stayed for 4 years. My brother, I'll call him by what he always was to me, which is the favorite. He moved to Phoenix 2 months after the funeral. New job, he said. Dad understood, complete said. Dad helped him pack. I stayed. I took over my mother's grocery runs. I learned which brands my father liked, how he took his coffee, that he needed the thermostat at 68 degrees or he'd complain about it all evening. I worked remotely, so I was home most of the day. I paid 1/3 of the utilities. I kept the yard up. I cooked 4 nights a week. I'm not telling you this to make myself sound like a saint. I'm telling you because it matters for what came later. The house was in my parents' names when my mother died. Arizona is a community property state, so her half passed automatically to my father. He became the sole owner. We all understood that. There was a will, there was a trust, everything was in order. My mother had been careful about those things. She was an accountant for 20 years. She didn't leave loose ends. What the trust said. And I only knew this because my mother had sat me down the year before she died and walked me through it. The way she did with everything, methodically, with a printed copy and a highlighter, was that upon my father's death or voluntary transfer, the house would be divided equally between me and my brother. 50-50. That was her wish. That was what she'd built into the document. My father knew this. He just didn't think it applied to him while he was still alive. The first sign that something had shifted came about 2 years after I moved back in. My brother flew in for Thanksgiving, and the energy in the house changed the moment he walked through the door. My father stood taller, laughed louder, pulled out the good whiskey. I watched them sit in the living room talking about the sons, about some investment my brother was looking at, about whether my father should finally redo the back patio. All these plans, all this future talk, and I was in the kitchen making the meal that would feed all of us. I told myself it was normal. Absence makes the heart more dramatic. I told myself a lot of things in those years. The second sign came that spring. My father mentioned, casually, over breakfast, that he'd been thinking about simplifying the estate. I asked what that meant. He said just getting things in order. I asked if I should talk to the family attorney. He said he'd handle it. I should have pushed harder. I know that now. The third sign, the one I can't explain away, can't chalk up to grief or old age or just how fathers sometimes are, came on a Tuesday evening in March, about 8 months ago. I had just gotten off a long call with a client. It was almost 7. I came downstairs to start dinner and found my father at the kitchen table with a man I didn't recognize. There were papers spread out between them. My father looked up when I walked in, and something crossed his face. Not guilt, exactly. More like irritation. Like I'd interrupted something. He introduced the man as his financial advisor. I said hello. The man gathered the papers quickly. Not rudely, but efficiently, the way people do when they don't want you to see what they're working on. That night, I did something I'm not proud of. I went through my father's desk. I want to be clear, I wasn't snooping for the sake of it. I was looking for a specific document. The copy of the trust my mother had given me years earlier had been in a folder in my old room, and that folder had gone missing during a cleaning push the previous fall. My father said he hadn't seen it. I believed him at the time. I found what I was looking for in the 3rd drawer. It was a quitclaim deed, signed by my father, transferring full ownership of the house to my brother. Dated 6 weeks earlier. I stood there in the dark kitchen for a long time. I looked at the document but I didn't touch it. I read it twice. I put it back exactly where I found it, and I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of my bed, and I thought about my mother sitting across from me at this same table, highlighter in hand, saying, "I want you to know what's yours, Naomi. I want you to understand it so no one can take it from you." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry either. I think I was too far past the point where crying would have helped. What I did was make a list. I'm a practical person. And when something knocks the ground out from under me, I make a list. Step 1. Confirm what I'd seen. Step 2. Understand my legal standing. Step 3. Decide what to do. Step 1 took 3 days. I found the recorded deed online through the county assessor's website. The transfer had been filed and accepted. It was real. Step 2 took a week and a consultation with an estate attorney named, well, that doesn't matter. What matters is what she told me. She said a quitclaim deed can transfer property, but it cannot override a legally executed trust. She said my mother's trust was the controlling document. She said I had standing. She asked if I wanted to pursue it. I said I needed to think. During those 2 weeks, I went about my life like nothing had happened. I made dinner. I watched the news with my father. I asked about his doctor's appointment and whether he'd called the plumber about the guest bathroom sink. I was pleasant. I was present. I was completely somewhere else. I thought about my brother a lot during that time, about whether he knew what our father had done, about whether he'd asked for it, or just accepted it, or whether he was as in the dark as I'd been until 3 weeks earlier. I decided it didn't matter yet. I could only deal with what was in front of me. I also thought about leaving. I thought about it seriously. Just packing my things, finding an apartment, walking away from the house and the history, and the whole suffocating weight of it. Part of me wanted that more than anything. The part that was tired. The part that had been cooking and cleaning, and keeping this household running for 4 years, while my brother built a life in Phoenix, and my father slowly rewrote the story of our family. But I thought about my mother. About the care she'd taken. About the fact that she had specifically, deliberately, with full legal precision included me. She hadn't done that by accident. I called the attorney back. I told her I wanted to proceed. The process, she explained, would involve filing a claim against the deed based on the existing trust. Given that the trust predated the quitclaim and had been properly executed and funded, the outcome was likely. Not guaranteed, nothing in law is guaranteed, but likely. She estimated 3 to 5 months. I went home that evening and sat with my father while he watched the game. He was in a good mood. He'd gotten a good report from his cardiologist. He asked if I wanted to order pizza. I said sure. We sat there eating pizza from the box, and I looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to understand the version of him that had signed that deed. The version that had called that financial advisor to the kitchen table, that had filed papers with the county without saying a word to me. I tried to find in his face some evidence that he'd wrestled with it. Some sign of conflict. He seemed fine. That was the part that broke something in me that I don't think has fully healed. Not the deed, not the legal maneuver. The fineness, the ease of it. The way he handed me a paper napkin and asked if I wanted another slice like we were just 2 people eating dinner. Like nothing had happened. Like I was a guest in a house that was, as far as he'd arranged it, no longer mine. 3 months into the legal process, I started looking for apartments. I wasn't running. I want to be clear about that. I was preparing. There's a difference. Even if it doesn't always look like one from the outside. I found a 2-bedroom on the east side of the city, close to the coffee shop where I did most of my work, close to a friend who'd been telling me for years I should live on my own. The lease started on the 1st of the following month. I put down the deposit. I did not tell my father. My brother called me in April. Checking in, he said. I asked how Phoenix was. He asked how Dad was. We had the conversation we always had. The careful, surface-level exchange of people who love each other, but have never quite figured out how to say the things that actually matter. Before he hung up, he said, almost as an aside, "Hey, has Dad talked to you about the house stuff?" I went very still. "A little," I said. "Why?" There was a pause. He mentioned he was updating some things. I told him to make sure everything was clear. "Did he tell you what he'd done?" Another pause, longer this time. "He said he'd taken care of it." I thought about pushing. I thought about telling my brother right then, on that phone call, exactly what our father had taken care of, and exactly what I'd been doing about it for the past 3 months. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he'd said I told him to make sure everything was clear, like he'd had concerns, like he wasn't entirely comfortable, or maybe I just wasn't ready to blow up the whole structure of our family before I knew how it was going to end. I said, "Okay, good to know." We hung up. May came. The attorney called to tell me the process was moving forward, and that the trust's claims were holding up. She had that particular attorney speak calm. That either means everything is fine, or everything is about to be fine. I started moving boxes to the new apartment on weekends. My father noticed a few things missing from my room. A lamp, a bookshelf, the old mirror I'd had since college, and I told him I was lending them to a friend who was redoing her place. He accepted this with the mild lack of curiosity of a person who is not paying close attention. I felt a cold kind of clarity about that. The call from my attorney came on a Thursday in late June. She said the court had ruled in favor of the trust. The quitclaim deed was set aside. The property would be subject to the original trust terms, meaning it would remain under my father's use and ownership during his lifetime. We weren't taking anything from him, but upon his death or voluntary sale, it would be divided equally, as my mother had intended. My brother had been notified. He had not contested it. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the coffee shop for about 20 minutes. I was not triumphant. I want to say that clearly because I think it's the most important thing. When I imagined this moment, and I had imagined it during those months, I imagined feeling relieved, maybe even vindicated, like justice had clicked into place and something in my chest could finally loosen. What I actually felt was grief. Clean, quiet grief, like standing in a room after something has been removed from it. Not anger, not satisfaction, just the specific sadness of being someone's child and knowing, with full certainty, what they were willing to do. I went home that evening and cooked dinner. Pork chops, roasted potatoes, the green beans my father liked with the almonds. I set the table, I called him in, we ate. He told me about a documentary he'd watched about national parks. I listened. I asked a question or two. After dinner, he settled into his chair, and I went upstairs and sat on my bed and thought about my mother, and whether she'd known, on some level, that this was a conversation I might one day need to have. I think she did. I think that's why she sat me down. I think she knew her husband, loved him, and also saw him clearly enough to prepare her daughter for the version of him that might emerge when she was no longer there to hold things steady. That Saturday, I told my father I was moving out. He didn't react the way I expected. I think I expected anger, or at least that particular injured silence he'd perfected over the years. Instead, he looked confused, a little lost. He asked where I was going. I told him I'd found my own place, that it was time, that I was 31 years old and it made sense. He asked if this was about the house. I looked at him for a moment. I know about the deed, Dad. The silence that followed was long enough that I could hear the refrigerator hum. I had an attorney look into it, I said. The trust stands. Mom made sure of that. The house works the way she intended it to work, for as long as you're here. That's not going to change. But I need to live my own life. He started to say something, stopped. Started again. I wasn't trying to. I know, I said. And I did know. In that complicated way you know things about your parents when you've been watching them long enough. He wasn't a villain. He was a man who'd lost his wife and made choices that came from somewhere. Fear, maybe. Or the belief that my brother needed more. Or just the particular blindness that comes from loving one child slightly less and never examining why. He wasn't a villain, but that didn't mean what he'd done hadn't hurt. I moved out the following weekend. My brother drove up from Phoenix, which surprised me. He helped carry boxes. At one point while we were loading my car, he said I had no idea he'd actually filed it. I believed him. I still believe him. She included us both, I said. That's all I was asking for. He nodded. He looked like he might say more, and then he didn't, and that was okay. Some conversations need time to get where they're going. My apartment is quiet in a way the house never was. It has a small balcony where I drink coffee in the mornings. I have my lamp back, my bookshelf, my old mirror. I put a plant on the balcony, something my mother always did. She said it made a space feel alive. I call my father on Sundays. Sometimes we talk for 10 minutes, sometimes 30. He asks about work. I ask about his shows. It is careful and it is limited, and it is for now, what I can offer. I don't know what will look like in 5 years. I don't know if the distance will soften into something real, or just calcify into politeness. I don't know if he's ever going to say the thing I actually need to hear, which isn't an apology for the deed, exactly, but something more fundamental. Something about seeing me. Something about my mother's daughter having been worth the same as her brother, all along. Maybe he'll get there. People do, sometimes, when the thing they were protecting stops feeling so urgent. Or maybe he won't. And I'll build a life that doesn't require it. My mother used to say that you can love someone and still need to protect yourself from them. She said it once, offhandedly, about a woman in her book club, and I filed it away the way you file things that don't seem relevant yet. I understand it now. I have her trust documents in a folder in my desk drawer. I've read them so many times the creases are soft. She wrote in the margins, in pencil, little notes to herself, check with attorney AZ law, update if we move, and at the very bottom of the last page in handwriting that I would know anywhere. For both my children, equally, always. I never wanted the house to be a battleground. I just wanted her wishes to mean something. And in the end, in the only way that still mattered, they did.